Hello, everyone, and welcome to Slash Film Daily for Monday, July 22nd, 2019. On today's episode, we're going to talk about the latest film and TV news with Slash Film Editor-in-Chief Peter Sciretta. And joining me on today's podcast is Slash Film Weekend Editor Brad Oman.
Hey, that's me.
Senior Writer Ben Pearson.
Hey, what's going on? And
Writer Chris Evangelista.
Hello, folks.
So, the Slash Film team is back from Comic-Con. It was pretty insane on Saturday. I want to thank you guys, because you three, were the people at home on the ground, at home helping the people on the ground get the stuff up, because that Marvel panel was just insane. We'll talk about that in a few seconds. So I want to thank you, and I also want to thank HT and Jacob being, at war in Hall H, covering this stuff. It was just a barrage of news. And I also want to apologize that, doing a daily podcast is tough. And on the weekend, on Saturday, doing things remotely and not doing things the way we normally do things. Sometimes things can go wrong, and on our Saturday version of the podcast, there was some audio hiccups. And no, it wasn't just your connection to the podcast. It was our problem, and there was no way of fixing it. So I apologize about that. But hopefully the episode, the Marvel episode, was much better. So, anyways, okay. So before we get to the news, guys, I wanted to hear what you guys think about all these Marvel Comic-Con announcements. Let's start with Brad.
I was very surprised by how much they dove into in this presentation, especially with the reveals of certain specific details on the upcoming projects. I think I'm most curious as to just how deep the new Disney Plus TV shows are going to tie into the rest of the Marvel Cinematic Universe. Obviously, so far, shows like Agents of S.H.I.E.L.D. and all of the street-level superhero shows that form the Defenders were part of the MCU, but not really anything more than tangentially connected to them. And it really seems like these will have an integral part in fleshing out the story of the MCU rather than just being non-essential. I think that Marvel's hope is to make them necessary viewing, especially with that WandaVision series apparently tying directly into the Doctor Strange sequel. And speaking of which, it's the Doctor Strange movie and Thor movie that I'm probably most excited, simply based on the titles. You have Thor, Love and Thunder, and Doctor Strange in the Multiverse of Madness. And both of those just sound like they're going to be incredibly stylish. They're going to dive into weirder sides of the Marvel Cinematic Universe. They're going to do surprising things with the characters. I love the idea of bringing back Natalie Portman as Thor, the Goddess of Thunder. And yeah, there's so many exciting things that they announced that I was floored that they're doing so much.
Yeah, I think it's really telling that they included the TV shows, the Disney Plus TV shows, on that graph of Phase 4 and the importance of those. Ben, what are your thoughts?
Yeah, I guess overwhelmed is the wrong word, because we knew that almost all of these things were coming. I think, is that right? I think we knew actually that all of this stuff was coming. All of it had been sort of rumored or rumbled about right beforehand.
Except Blade.
Oh, right. Yeah, the Blade thing. That was cool. The stuff at the end, the mentions of Fantastic Four and mutants and, that stuff we knew as well. But Blade was brand new, and especially for Mahershala Ali to walk out, and I guess we'll talk about that in a minute.
Although you're saying all the projects we knew about. Yeah, we knew about Thor 4, but we didn't know it was going to be called Love and Thunder and, bring back Natalie Portman as a female Thor.
Right. Yeah. There was just... overwhelmed, I guess, might be the right word looking back on it all, especially considering, just not being in the room and just hearing you guys talk about, oh my God, this is happening. They just said this. And we're barely having time to process the thing before they're on to the next one.
This is probably getting into too much minutia, but before these big events, what we do on the Slash Film Slack is we write up posts. We plan for everything, so that we have things ready, and then we can add the details to those posts. So we had a post about Thor 4 and having details about Taika Waititi and everything we knew about it, so that we could quickly fill in the details when we learned them and publish. Even with us preparing all that stuff, we were illfully unprepared.
Yeah, because we thought that at D23 was when they were going to talk about all the TV stuff, and it was very apparent very early, like, oh shit, they're going to talk about all this TV stuff here, and it must have been pretty amazing for you guys to sort of be in the room and see all those people, being trotted out and the whole deal. So
it was crazy. Chris, I know you are the one here that is probably the least excited about the future of the MCU, but they did announce the first MCU horror film.
Yeah, I mean, these announcements, they all more or less sounded fine. I did not go as crazy over this as you guys did, just because, I don't know, it's very hard for me to get too worked up over this stuff. Not that I don't care, it's just that it's so early in the process. Like, this was literally like a PowerPoint presentation. Like, all right, it's cool that these movies will eventually come out, but there's so little there yet that I reserve.
I will say, when you're there, you do see a lot more. Like, those logos were not just logos; they had like these like animated intros that unfortunately we were not able to like videotape or anything. And Chris, you were there last year. When you're in that room, and they're doing, like, you were there for, what was it, the Warner Brothers panel? Like, it is a show.
No, yeah, but again, I wasn't there this year, so it wasn't really, it's fine. I'm the least excited of everyone here, but I'm also not like, these all sound terrible, because they all sound pretty cool. Especially, the Thor movie sounds really fun. I'm excited about a new Blade movie, even though I don't know how they're going to make that fit into the MCU, because it seems so far removed from that, but I guess we'll see. So, obviously I will end up seeing all of these movies when they exist, but for now I'm sort of neutral.
Okay, let's we have a lot of news to get to, a lot of fallout from Comic-Con. Kevin Feige did some interviews after the presentation and clarified a bunch of things. Let's start first with the LGBTQ Marvel heroes that are going to be apparently spread across Phase 4. Ben, what do we know?
Yeah, so Tessa Thompson during the panel mentioned that in Thor Love and Thunder, her character Valkyrie needs to find her queen. And that is, of course, confirmation that her character is bisexual, which we knew from Thor Ragnarok, but a scene that sort of like explicitly detailed that, or not explicit, that's probably the wrong word to use in this context, but specifically detailed that piece of information ended up being cut from Thor Ragnarok. So it was much more sort of left up to interpretation. And even though Tessa Thompson was talking a lot about that at the time, the movie itself, a lot of people were hoping that the film itself would have included more references to that and sort of normalize that a little bit more. And it sounds like in an interview with IO9 that Kevin Feige did after that panel, it sounds like we're going to be seeing and getting an LGBTQ friendly story for Valkyrie in Thor Love and Thunder. He said the answer is yes. How that impacts the story remains to be seen, but that level of representation you will see across our films, not just in Thor 4. So
what does that mean, Ben?
It means that in the Eternals, which is another movie that they announced officially, one of those characters is going to be LGBTQ in that film. So we're not sure whether that's like a hero or a villain, but Feige specifically confirmed that to Collider in another interview right after the Comic-Con panel. So, I mean, this is basically the floodgates are being opened, and hopefully in a way that is, much more sort of inclusive and embracing those aspects of these characters instead of just what Marvel's parent company Disney has been doing lately in a lot of these live action movies with gay characters. It's just been sort of like barely mentioning it, or not having it be something that the LGBTQ community can really latch onto and appreciate as like a piece of representation that really like matters to them.
It's not substantial in any way.
Exactly. Yeah. So he hasn't said what other movies that or TV shows. I guess the Disney Plus stuff could count as well. But he mentioned Phase 4. Some of these projects are going to have LGBTQ characters. So that's just it's going to be a big step forward for Marvel.
Okay, so the biggest surprise at the Marvel panel was at the end when it was revealed that they're doing a Blade reboot. Chris, how did this come together?
So believe it or not, Mahershala Ali literally just went to Kevin Feige and said, "I want to play Blade," and Kevin Feige said, "Okay." And I
this
can't
happened like the week after he won the Oscar.
Right, yeah, it happened pretty much on the heels of him winning his Oscar for Green Book. So, he just went to Kevin Feige. He said, "Look, I really want to play Blade." Kevin Feige was like, "All right, how can I say no to that?" And that's really it. I mean, there's really nothing else to go on. There's no director attached. There's no story. And
so does this mean it's not going to be in Phase 4?
Right, it's definitely not in Phase 4. At the earliest, it'll be Phase 5, which isn't till 2022, but it could even be later than that. So we're gonna have to wait a little while, but for now, this is cool casting. He's a great actor. Blade is a really cool character. As cool as it would have been to have somehow Wesley Snipes come back. He's a lot older now. I don't know how that would really work, even though he's expressed interest online in coming back, but maybe they can give him like a cameo or something. Who knows? But this is still a long ways off, but this is pretty cool. I'm excited to see how this turns out.
You mentioned before how it might be weird for this to be combined with the MCU. Do you think like maybe they could have this finally be like one of those series that takes place in the MCU, but it's not really connected? If you ask me now, yes. I don't know how else they could do it. They haven't really established vampires in the MCU yet. But like I said, this is going to be a at least one phase away. So they have it between now and then to be like, oh, by the way, there are vampires. But at the same time, maybe I wish Marvel would take a breather and make some sort of standalone movies. Yeah. Obviously I haven't seen it yet. I don't know how it's going to turn out, but I kind of wish they would do something like DC is doing with that Joker movie, where it doesn't actually have anything to do with continuity, but it's still considered part of the MCU. I think that would be neat. I would say the one thing surprising about the announcements is kind of how they don't seem to be that connected to one another. So I was wondering, does that excite you, that it seems to be like about beginnings?
It does. One of the things I did like about this announcement is that, while some things tie together, like, the WandaVision show will tie into Doctor Strange or whatever, a lot of these things, they sound very much like their own stories. Like, I can't imagine how, Black Widow connects to Thor, Love and Thunder, and so I kind of like that. I want Marvel to, they already spent the last few years doing their big connective thing. I think it would be neat for them to do something completely different now.
I walked out of this panel, overwhelmed, exhausted by all these announcements, but I was also scratching my head, as I said on the podcast yesterday, on how this is the first time that Marvel has announced a phase of movies where there isn't an endpoint that kind of, all leads to one endpoint. Like, Phase 1 led to Avengers, Phase 2 led to Age of Ultron, Phase 3 led to, Infinity War and Endgame. It was all, leading up to something. This didn't. I theorized on the podcast that maybe this isn't all of Phase 4. Maybe there's more to be announced at D23 Expo. Brad, was I wrong?
It does seem so, because Kevin Feige was specifically asked about the lack of an Avengers project appearing in this phase. And this does seem to be the entirety of Phase 4. Kevin Feige spoke with IGN after the panel was finished and was directly asked about whether or not there was an Avengers movie in our midst, or why there wasn't one announced for this phase. And he said, well, we had a movie this year called Avengers Endgame, and it is very much an ending, as you saw, to so many of those characters. So Phase 4 is about beginnings, and Phase 4 is about learning new things about characters you already think you know, like Black Widow, meeting incredible new characters like the Eternals and Shang-Chi, going on new adventures with Doctor Strange and Thor, and these Disney Plus shows, which I promise will be spectacular and not what anybody's expecting. So it sounds like there won't be an Avengers movie for Phase 4. There's no surprise announcement in our midst. This will be how Phase 4 turns out. And honestly, I kind of like that, because it seems like they're mixing up their formula a little bit. We're not just going to be dealing with phases where, okay, here's some individual franchises, and then here's an Avengers movie. And then, all right, here's more of individual franchises, and here's an Avengers movie. But that doesn't mean that we're not still leading to something big. You guys just talked about how this Phase 4 doesn't really seem to have much interconnectivity as far as like seeing a clear way how they'll all tie together. But that's also how the first phase of the Marvel Cinematic Universe was in general. We had all these origin stories for Thor and Captain America and Iron Man, and there wasn't that interconnectivity.
But at the end of that, you had that Avengers movie. Like, I'd just be happy with like one, like, Civil War at the end of this or something.
Well, for sure. Well, I mean, I don't know. For me, I feel like this phase will be about planting the seeds that will probably lead to something bigger like that. And if anything, I'm betting that this is probably all set up for introducing the idea of the new Avengers, and that will be something that comes maybe in Phase 5, and we'll start to see the shape of what it is we're going towards as far as the big Infinity War Endgame level event that will be coming. And I'm willing to bet that it'll end up being tied to the introduction of Fantastic Four and X-Men.
I hate to be that conspiracy theory guy that's like, has the thing set in his heart and he's like, no, it's going to be this. But I really think they're going to add something in here at the end of this phase. I could be totally wrong. But Ben, do you have any thoughts? Like, am I just totally insane?
I think you're a little bit insane, Peter, of course. But I mean, yeah, it's interesting that they have 4 movies and none of them theoretically are going to include or at least from what we know right now, are going to include a lot of the biggest character, Black Panther and even like Ant-Man and Spider-Man and some of that, none of those characters, there aren't really opportunities here based on what little we know about these properties yet to introduce those characters. And if they do, it's going to seem like, why isn't everybody there? Like you mentioned, Civil War, that was a big Captain America movie, but it felt kind of like an Avengers movie because everybody was there. And otherwise, when characters have popped up in different solo movies or whatever, it's sort of felt like the example I think of is Homecoming, right? Where it's like Iron Man showed up to sort of help Spider-Man along into, for his like full entrance into the MCU. And it doesn't really seem like there's an opportunity for a big team up based on the properties that they've announced here, at least in the movie world. I'm interested to see if there's any sort of other crossovers that we don't see coming.
I feel like Marvel has made a lot of money on this, like made a lot of money on, introducing characters, having a Captain Marvel movie and being like, oh, she's going to play a huge part in Endgame. Having Black Panther movie and be like, oh, he's going to play a big part in Infinity War. And setting up these big things that are to look forward to, and then when they introduce someone, getting people excited about these new characters in a way that Hollywood has not been able to do elsewhere, because they're a part of that end of the phase thing. And without the end of the phase thing, I don't know, I'm just a little skeptical. But I would never bet against Marvel because they are the only thing making money consistently in Hollywood. So let's talk about Natalie Portman, the other big surprise. Ben, how did that come about?
Yeah, so that deal actually, the idea of bringing Natalie Portman back into the world of Thor apparently began with Taika Waititi making Thor Ragnarok, and he was on the set of that movie, according to the Hollywood Reporter's Heat Vision. He was on the set of that movie reading Jason Aaron's fan favorite comic run that featured a female Thor, and had that idea to bring Natalie Portman back then. And her deal has actually been in the works, or not even in the works, it was completed in secret 6 months ago. So this has been, something that she, people were sort of wondering like, oh yeah, she showed up at the Avengers Endgame premiere. Because Natalie Portman has had like an interesting history with Marvel, right? Because once Patty Jenkins was hired to direct Thor: The Dark World, and then she was fired off that movie, Natalie Portman was not thrilled about that. And she hasn't really been featured in a Marvel movie since 2013 in a notable way. But now she's going to be back. She was in
Endgame, but that was using cut footage or edited footage. So everybody just speculated that we would never see her again.
Right, yeah. So that's part of the big surprise here. And the other surprise is how long this has been sort of in the works. So apparently Kevin Feige told a Hollywood Reporter that we set Natalie and Taika up, and in one meeting she agreed to do it. So that was one of the big ideas that they had for this movie. So I'm happy to see it because like Brad, I'm very excited about Natalie Portman returning to this world, but it definitely caught me by surprise.
I mean, Portman was unhappy with how those first two Thor movies turned out. I think even in the same way that Hemsworth was. And what do you think led her back? Is it Taika, or is it the prospect of being, a lead Marvel hero?
I think it's probably a combination of both, because Taika revitalized that franchise in a way that none of us really saw coming, especially after Thor: The Dark World. And I think he's really his passion and his approach on it has really rubbed off on Hemsworth in a great way. And I think it's sort of given him a new lease on this character. And I think the idea for Portman to play a female hero instead of just a love interest is probably a pretty enticing one. And then also to do that under the guidance of Taika Waititi in a movie where Natalie Portman is not exactly known for her comedic prowess, but neither was Hemsworth in those early days. And I feel like he's become consistently like one of the, most surprisingly funny performers out there. And I think maybe this could be one of those things where it shows people a new side to Natalie Portman. I'm sure she would be, open to showing the world that side of her.
Well,
I bet she likes money too.
That too, but she also did tweet out a photo of her at the Hall H presentation, and she said, like, "Look at this as my before photo, and the after photo is going to be jacked." So I'm wondering how jacked Natalie Portman's going to get.
Yeah, I mean, I think you played some audio from an interview for Captain Marvel where Samuel L. Jackson was showing you a video of Brie Larson lifting a car. So I wonder if Natalie Portman's going to do the same thing.
Yeah, I mean, maybe. I mean, I'm sure she's just as dedicated as Brie Larson, so I wouldn't bet against it. Okay, lastly, The Eternals is probably a property that we know the least about. I mean, we don't really know what that film is going to be, but Kevin Feige was asked about the Eternals, and he did give up some details. Brad, what did he say?
Yes, in case you didn't see, after the Marvel panel this weekend, there was a piece of concept art from the Eternals that surfaced as part of Marvel's tradition of releasing some concept art posters at Comic-Con as handouts for fans who are actually in attendance there. And since Black Widow and the Eternals are the next two titles on their release timeline, those are the ones who got posters this time. And along with that, we got news that kind of ties into that, because that concept art shows the Celestials, which are these big cosmic beings. They're the ones who the Collector talked about in Guardians of the Galaxy, who have the ability to wield the Infinity Stones and can use them to do things that require crazy amounts of power. You see one destroying an entire, civilization and a planet when the Guardians are learning about the origins of the Infinity Stones. And Kevin Feige said we'll learn a lot more about them and the Eternals as well. And so what Feige said was it will be a story that will introduce you to this incredibly eclectic group of immortals. They're the focus of the story. It takes place in our universe. It takes place in the MCU, so you hear mentions and stuff about it, but the Celestials go back a long way. We know a little about them. The Collector told us about Celestials. Nowhere is the severed head of a Celestial. Ego was involved with them, but we learn much more about their agenda and what they've been up to. So, for me, and maybe I'm just reading into a I don't want to say a negative way, but an intriguing way, is that it sounds like maybe the Celestials aren't necessarily full-on good guys. We were told during the Marvel Comic-Con panel that the Eternals have been tasked by the Celestials to protect Earth from a group of humanoids called the Deviants. Beyond that, we don't know much about what the movie will entail, but I feel like whenever you have any kind of organization or board or group of people who tell another group what to do, there's usually something that's questionable or nefarious about their intentions as to why they want to do that. We can see evidence of that in the Marvel Cinematic Universe with S.H.I.E.L.D. turning into Hydra. So there's probably something at play here that maybe the Celestials want to happen that the Eternals don't know about. It's also intriguing that they mention Ego being involved with them. Obviously, he was very powerful himself. He was a Celestial as well. But one has to wonder if maybe he was used to do something that the Celestials other Celestials told him to do that is a little bit more menacing of a plan for the universe.
Feige at the end of the panel, before they made that Blade reveal, did mention Fantastic Four and X-Men. That excited fans who thought maybe that might mean that they're further along in development on those than we had anticipated. Did Kevin say anything about those properties?
Just a little bit, but it's really the only thing is just that mention was just to kind of tease fans that they have control of those characters now. They will plan on doing something with them. Feige himself said that he was extremely excited about those characters and about bringing Marvel's first family up to the platform and the level that they deserve, which definitely implies that the previous Fantastic Four movies did not do that. But otherwise, there's not any real active development. He said they haven't even cracked a story for either of those franchises yet, and they haven't even begun casting. So, as we've heard, that's something that is probably much further off. At the very least in Phase 5, maybe not even until Phase 6, because even back when the Fox deal with Disney was coming together, a lot of questions were asked about their plans for Fantastic Four and X-Men. And since the deal only just closed at the beginning of this year, none of Marvel's plans, which we know are in order for the next 5 years, had those characters involved because they weren't for sure going to get them, and they didn't want to rely on that kind of plan. That doesn't mean that Marvel's plan over the next 5 years couldn't change, because as we've seen, plenty of projects got shuffled around, moved back, never happened.
Look what happened with Spider-Man.
Inhumans as well, yeah. So, anything can happen, but at this point, I feel like we're just going to have to wait and see how they're going to introduce those characters into the universe, especially because, Fantastic Four will have a big impact on the cosmic side of things, and X-Men will be even trickier because it has such a huge roster of characters, and when you have a character like Magneto who is tied to real history, and you have all these characters where a big thematic element surrounding them is the idea of people being afraid of them, and not being accepted because they are, what are called mutants. But we live in a world where people mostly love superheroes. But then again, Spider-Man could start to change that with him being framed to be this sort of villain now. So maybe we'll go back to an era where people are scared of people who have superpowers again.
Well, I think we're all under the belief that we're probably going to see the Fantastic Four before we see the mutants, but more on that at a later time. We have a couple other stories I want to get to today because they happened over the last week. We just weren't able to get to them while we were at Comic-Con. The first of which they announced not one but 2 Halloween sequels that will end this trilogy. Chris, what do we know?
Yeah, so we knew for a fact that there was going to be at least one more Halloween sequel coming from Blumhouse, and that David Gordon Green was probably going to come back, and Jamie Lee Curtis was going to come back, and that was pretty much a given. And there was a rumor that might actually be 2 sequels, but that wasn't confirmed until last week when John Carpenter was the first person to tweet out this little video announcement that revealed that there are indeed 2 Halloween movies coming back to back. The first one is called Halloween Kills, and that'll be due out October 16th, 2020. And then Halloween Ends will come out the following year on October 15th, 2021. And Jamie Lee Curtis is coming back. David Gordon Green is coming back. Danny McBride will be back. Pretty much everyone from the first film, or not first film, but the last Halloween is going to be back for these 2 sequels, which will presumably finally conclude the Michael Myers / Laurie Strode story.
Do these titles tell us anything?
I mean, Halloween Kills is really vague. But Halloween Ends sounds pretty definite. So I'm guessing, that's going to wrap everything up. But we've also, horror movies are notorious for putting like final and ending and stuff in their title, and then they come back and make 10 more sequels. So who knows?
Yeah, I don't buy this is going to be the end of Halloween, but we'll have to see.
Chris, real quick, on I think it was the last water cooler, Jacob was talking about Halloween 3 and how that movie really has nothing to do with Michael Myers. Do you think that there's a chance that they're saying Halloween Ends for Michael Myers, but they'll continue making Halloween movies that don't involve him? Or do you think that Michael Myers is Halloween, with the iconography of that, and they're just going to have to keep making movies with that character?
As much as like horror fans have come around on Halloween 3, I do think they make these movies not just for horror fans. They make them for the general public. And if they started releasing Halloween movies again without Michael Myers, the same thing would happen all over again, where the general public would be like, what the hell is this? Where is Michael Myers?
But could they do copycat killers, people dressing as Michael Myers? On Halloween, killing people on Halloween?
If they did, I would be furious. So no, they cannot do that.
Okay. Our last story is about Star Wars, The Rise of Skywalker. I guess very, very vague spoilers coming up. I wouldn't really consider it a spoiler as much as, I guess, a statement and anticipation? Building up?
Sure.
Yeah, hype?
Sure.
Hype?
Sure. Yeah, whatever, maybe. First of all, there's, in addition to this little tidbit we're going to discuss here in a second, if you look at the weekend stories, there was a revelation of a new TIE fighter and also the promise of a backstory for Kylo Ren and how he became to work with the Knights of Ren.
By the way, that's coming from Charles Soule, who is a great writer. He's done a bunch of my favorite comic books, and apparently that's coming out before the movie comes out, which is a surprise because that's going to chronicle Kylo Ren from, I guess, from his training up until we see him in Force Awakens.
Yeah, it'll be a short, limited comic series. It comes out right before the movie, sometime in December. It's called The Rise of Kylo Ren, and yeah, it's the image is him standing with the Knights of Ren. So it's the story that a lot of fans have wanted to see, and he said that it is definitely something that we aren't prepared for. But on top of that, this little extra tidbit came from Kevin Smith, who is always talking about Star Wars, and at Comic-Con is always talking endlessly about everything that he loves. And in case you hadn't heard, Kevin Smith had a heart attack back in early 2018. And when he was recovering, J.J. Abrams had promised to have him come visit the set of The Rise of Skywalker. He'd previously visited the Force Awakens set, famously cried all about it, and seeing the Millennium Falcon back and everything. Kevin Smith did indeed get to visit Pinewood Studios while they were filming. And there was one thing that a lot of people were buzzing about, and they told him that he had to see. And it was some set on the movie where the final shot takes place. Smith doesn't mention what the set is or what the final shot entails for obvious reasons. But he said that there was, quote, a lot of scuttlebutt about the set there at Pinewood. And a lot of people were like, you have to see this. When you see it, it will melt your mind. And he said, so I asked JJ, they keep telling me I should see this set. He's like, don't. It's the last shot of the movie. You don't want this spoiled. You want to be in a theater when this happens. Trust me. So after hearing that, he also heard some other people on the crew saying that they wish they hadn't seen it. And again, it will melt your mind. So after thinking about it, Smith said, as inquisitive as I am and as curious as I am, I desperately wanted to go look. But when you talk to the magician, and the magician is like, trust me on this one. Sometimes as human beings, we want to know how they pull the rabbit out of the hat. But JJ is such a magical magician that I'm just like, you know what? Do it. Trick me. I'll wait and get tricked. So he opted not to see the set. And this is, it's intriguing, if only because I don't know what could possibly be in the final shot of this movie that would
And it should be clear, it's like not like they were filming the final shot of the movie. It's they didn't want him to see the location of the
right, exactly. The only thing that I can think is that maybe the set is some new maybe like the new Jedi Temple. A lot of people have talked about the idea of the title of The Rise of Skywalker, meaning that Skywalker is this new designation of Jedi, a new kind of warrior that is Force sensitive, but not necessarily tied to the ways of the Jedi. And so part of me wonders if maybe the final shot is Rey, and there's this, a new, batch of recruits that she has that she's training to be Skywalkers, and maybe it's this big, elegant temple-like structure. Maybe there are like statues of Luke or Yoda or Obi-Wan or something like that. But even thinking of that, A, it seems too obvious, and B, that's not something that would really melt my mind. So I don't know. This maybe it's just Kevin Smith being hyperbolic. But if this is what all the crew members were telling him, then there's got to be something in the set of this final shot that is apparently epic.
Yeah, this is gonna make my brain buzz for like a week, just trying to think of what it could be what he could be talking about. But okay, I think we've gone over time here. That brings us to the end of today's Slash Film Daily. You can find more of all of our work at slashfilm.com. You can find links to all the stories you mentioned today in the show notes. By the way, you should check out HG's article on the new person who is cast as Shang-Chi. She basically explains who he is, his background as an actor, where you can find some of his work. So if you want to catch up on him before the movie hits, check out that article. Vanessa Armstrong also has an article on Marvel Studios' most electrifying moments at San Diego Comic-Con. It's a retrospective. It's a good article. Check that out as well. I'll link that in the show notes. This podcast is published every weekday on iTunes, Google, Overcast, Spotify, all the popular podcast apps. Please feel free to send your feedback, questions, comments, concerns to us at peter@slashfilm.com, and head on over to our iTunes page. Give us a rating, give us a review, tell your friends, spread the word, and we'll see you tomorrow.